Hello and welcome to the first ADHD Remapped monthly webinar. So I'm Matthew Menzies. I actually know most people on the call here. I'm the founder of ADHD Remapped and I'm an ADHD coach and ADHD training facilitator. So just to let you know that I'll be recording the session today. So if you don't want to talk and be recorded at the end or have your camera on, that sort of thing, that's perfectly fine. If you did have a question and you don't want to be recorded, then there'll be a chance to email me questions afterwards. So our journey for today will start with me sharing a little bit of my own ADHD story, and maybe you'll see a little bit of your story reflected in mine if either you or someone close to you has ADHD. We'll look at the principles behind a strength-based approach to ADHD and ADHD coaching. And we'll also explore a couple of really common ADHD characteristics and how they could present in somebody's life. And we'll link them back to that strength-based approach. We'll also review the gold standard for ADHD support or treatment. And then finally, we'll have some time at the end. So any questions you have, please write them down if you have ADHD so you don't forget them. And then you can ask away at the end. As I say, if you're not comfortable asking out loud, feel free to type in the chat, or you can also find my email at the bottom of the page here, but then I'll also have it on the final Q&A page as well. So you can always ask me a question afterwards. Presentation is roughly 30 minutes or so, 35 minutes. So I thought I'd kind of make that a nice ADHD friendly period of time. So where I hope you'll get to by the end of this session is for you to kind of consider what you could do to choose the next chapter of your own ADHD story, your own ADHD journey. So a little bit about me and my ADHD journey. So this is a picture of me, very, very small, probably, yeah, no older than a year old there. It's a very old picture and that kind of shows my age. So the reason behind the name ADHD Remapped, so I spoke to my brothers about this and we kind of came up with some different ideas, and one of my brothers suggested Remapped, and for a couple of reasons I really liked it. The first one was when I was this age, some family members used to call me Mapu, so it's quite a cute little kind of personal connection. But what it really means to me, that idea of Remapped, you'll find out in the next kind of couple of slides. It's about that ADHD diagnosis, and it's about that journey and finding your own direction and remapping your own relationship and your own journey with your ADHD. And that, you know, has been a huge turning point in my life. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. A brief kind of summary of school life. So if you have ADHD, you'll be familiar with a lot of these terms. I was seen as a disruptive child, primary school, and you know, even more so in secondary school. Daydreamer, used to stare out the window a lot. You know, I always found my thoughts more interesting than what was going on in front of me in the classroom. Always must try harder. You know, if only you tried harder, if only you focused more, you could just be so much more. And like these constant negative thoughts. There's a statistic actually by a guy called Michael Jenical, and he says that by the age of 10, the ADHD child has experienced 20,000 negative comments. Now, imagine what that negative line kind of does to your mindset as a child, and then as you grow into an adult. You know, it's so detrimental. And for me personally, I became quite introverted as a teenager, particularly developed a lot of social anxiety and anxiety, particularly around going to school. It was like walking down the school path thinking, like, what am I going to do wrong today? Like, what am I going to get told off about today? What are we going to phone home about today? And it was a horrible experience. I very briefly, after leaving school, went to college, but for me, it was more of the same. And I left quite soon and found an alternative for myself. And, you know, this was a real turning point in my life. And I always speak about this with real passion. So at the age of 17, I joined the Royal Air Force. I joined the RAF as an avionics technician. Um, Structure and discipline can be quite difficult to achieve with ADHD. This environment, I had no choice. Like it was from 6 in the morning till midnight was structured discipline, structured discipline. And it was the perfect environment for me and my ADHD. Still undiagnosed at this point, but reflecting back, this was the first time in my life where I built that self-belief, where I looked at my achievement and was proud of myself. My pass out parade at RAF Halton after my 2 months initial training, and I was there with my mum, my dad, my brother, and my granddad, and like still to this day, it's a moment that just will live with me forever. It makes me shine when I think about it. Left the RAF to go to university, and from university became an engineer, and then a few years down the line was a teacher. Now, university life, I kind of socially as an adult felt different. I just felt like something wasn't quite right, and that introversion and that social anxiety stayed with me for many, many years. And at university, I always had a feeling that I was intelligent. I always knew I was intelligent and I could understand very, very complex topics, but I had like no working memory, common with ADHD, no ability to plan or organize, revised at the last second with no ability to remember formula and equations. And also was at that point still struggling quite a lot with emotional regulation. Went through career changes following university, always very successful, but I would go through this cycle, like 3 or 4 years of high achieve, burnout, breakdown, go through this whole kind of like mental kind of breakdown. And, a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety came up, which takes me through to probably the most significant time in my life for many reasons. The first reason is having my son. I was 37 when he was born. It did have a detriment in a lot of ways. Like being a father changed me massively, and it actually significantly impacted my well-being. My emotional regulation just went into complete kind of like overdrive. It was chaos. That whole thought kind of noise in my mind was intense, and I really struggled with the kind of practicalities and it becomes quite mundane in those early months of the nappy changing and the feeds and that constant cycle, and it mentally it had a real kind of like negative impact on me. What it did do though is play a huge part in my route to being diagnosed. So a bit about me and my diagnosis. So 2021, it was 2020 was the start of when I went for therapy, and this was a year or two after my son was born, leading into early 21, and I was having therapy again for one of these kind of like loops of success and depression. And we were talking later on in the sessions about finding ways to find peace and calm and a settled kind of routine. And we explored reading. And I suggested to the therapist that, look, I've always thought I have dyslexia, and it's something that had always been on my mind. Maybe that was kind of partly due to some of the difficulties I had within my education. And I said, when I read a book and the words literally bounce around the page, like my eyes can't fix on a word, can't fix on a letter, I'll struggle through and read a page, get to the bottom. Again, you might find this is familiar, and then have to start again because I just literally did not remember a thing. And the therapist, and sorry, then also I said, but then find a book that's interesting, find a book that captures my attention, and I will read for hours. Like I will just flow, and the words are nice and calm, the page is calm, and I just flow really nicely and absorb all the information. And she said, well, there's no way this is dyslexia because there's no variability in dyslexia. So if you've got the same sort of paper and the same sort of text and the same color, like there's no difference in how you'll be able to interpret both pieces of information. And we got into a bit more conversation. She said, have you thought about exploring ADHD? And I was like, no, surely not. Like, bear in mind, I was a teacher for 5 years and so had a huge amount of like neurodivergence training. And it just never occurred to me that that might be a thing. So anyway, she sends the ASRS, which is the World Health Organization's self-reporting scale. So go through the questions, and it's, kind of how often do you have trouble wrapping up a project? You get like 80% of the way through, but then can't complete. Yeah, tick, always. How often do you have difficulties when you have to, when a task requires planning and organization? Tick, always. How often do you have problems remembering appointments and obligations? Tick, always. And like there's 16 or so of these questions. And yeah, every question was like always, 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 pretty much. And I just sat there thinking, every time I ticked a box, it was like, now this is starting to make sense. Now I understand. This is why the world just felt so differently to me. So led on kind of to a few more conversations with a therapist. That therapy ended. She wasn't a specialist. So I went and explored a diagnosis, NHS waiting times. This is 3 years ago. Even then were bad, and I know now they're even worse. So I was lucky to be able to go to a private clinic. So I managed to pay for an assessment, and I went through writing a report on my kind of history. My mum was involved, my brother was involved, and all this evidence went to the psychologist. Then I had a 2-hour assessment. And at the end, the doctor was basically said, you score highly in every area. You have combined type ADHD. It was like, wow, like really just everything started to come together. By this point, I was really, I expected it, but just having that confirmation, just, well, I'll talk about the whole emotional cycle. There's this thing I kind of like call the post-diagnosis cycle, I guess, and it's an emotional kind of cycle that you go through, which is really similar to the emotions that you go through in grief when you lose somebody. So that the first kind of feeling, if you've had a difficult time, is relief. And ADHD context, it's like, wow, like thank goodness there's a reason for all of these things that I've experienced and all these reasons why I've felt so different. And then the next emotion, number two, is kind of getting into that feeling of anger. Like why did I have to go through this? Why did I go all them years without getting the support and the diagnosis that I needed? Like it's just, you become quite angry at the school system, quite a bit angry at your parents as well. Like, why did you not recognize this? And, bear in mind, I was primary school in the 80s, secondary school in the 90s. And so because I wasn't bouncing off the walls like the stereotypical ADHD child, it would never have been considered. And so it's more of a systemic thing that you have to be angry at, rather than the individuals. Third and fourth emotions are around kind of like loss and resentment. And a lot of looking back, like I said earlier, like what could have been, had only I'd known, would I have achieved more? Would I have been more successful? But actually the biggest thing is, given my cycle of mental health, was like, would I have been happier? And have I lost, 20 years of happiness in adulthood because of this lack of a diagnosis? And it's a very intense period to go through. Now, there's no kind of like definition for a fifth emotion, but this is where it's now down to you as an individual. So you've been diagnosed, you've had time to process, and now it's up to you. Like, what's next? What do you choose to do next? And for me, for me, I sat down and I just decided that like I was no longer gonna kind of look back and think like, what if, what could have been. I'd kind of processed those emotions, and now it was time for me to sit down and say, right, now who do I really want to be? What is it that I really want to do in my life now I've got this information and I'm able to put these support networks in place? And that was really the point where I realized that I wanted to be a coach. I'd been a teacher for many years. As an engineer, I was always a mentor to young engineers, and I loved that social interaction. I love that ability to kind of like connect with people and be that kind of supportive and partnering figure. And I was just, yeah, coaching just stood out so much. And that's the journey I've been on for the last year. I qualified from ADCA, who are absolutely amazing ADHD coaching school. That was just last month, and it was a long kind of like 9 months journey with some fantastic colleagues. Very, very proud to have completed that course, and beyond the journey I am on now. And that's where ADHD Remapped comes in. So as I said earlier, we're going to look at some ideas around the strength-based approach and some principles. Bear with me a second. So the thing is with ADHD, particularly undiagnosed into adulthood, there's a huge amount of negative self-talk, okay? Bear with me a second. I'm going to change this layout so you can see a little more of the screen. There we go. There's a huge amount of negative self-talk, and typically that stems from all of that external input, like those 20,000 negative comments by the age of 10, a lifetime of being told, like, you're doing this wrong, you're not good enough, you're not trying hard enough, you're just not behaving, why can't you just be good? Like those things just round and round in your head. And that leads on to rumination. So rumination is this kind of like continual loop of negative thoughts, and they completely dominate your headspace. And, you know, if you have ADHD or know much about it, that noise is constant. It's, you know, constant cycle of thoughts, and, you know, from 10 to 100 thoughts cycling around endlessly in your head. And when they're negative because of all of this previous experience and this frustration and this emotion, it is really draining on your emotions and can cause, you know, horrible levels of burnout. And that kind of small amount of science around this, there's this thing in your mind called the RAS, which is the reticular activating system. And this is the gatekeeper to your mind in terms of thoughts, right? So it basically assesses the thoughts that are buzzing around, and it decides what to let through, what to pay attention to. And it will pay attention to and let through those signals with the strongest intensity. Now, if you've had a negative root in your life and negative external input, the negative signals are the strongest, right? So this RAS lets through all the negative signals, and those positive ones, which are really hard to find, it will just keep blocked on the outside. And so, you know, there's this saying, like, what you pay attention to grows. And so, like, I'm not bad, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. I just can't do this. I can't do this. I'm not capable. I'm not capable. And you say, the more you say it, the more you hear it in your mind, the bigger that grows. And it's so detrimental to, you know, self-confidence and kind of self-worth and happiness and, you know, your ability to kind of push through barriers. So where the strength-based approach comes in is, you know, we kind of look at where are you now? So from a coaching perspective, what situation are you in? We're going to look forward. We're going to find different ways to route through your life. Okay, we're going to explore your strengths and your beliefs and your values. Like, what are the things that truly make you shine in your life? I mentioned earlier about that moment with the RAF and being at the pass out parade, and that just being a moment in my life that just made me shine. And for me, those were, I could find so many true core beliefs and core strengths in that moment, that they're the moments when I was really myself. And those are the things that we explore and try and find. We look a lot at previous experience and kind of those moments where the world felt aligned and those positive memories, and we look back on them and we kind of identify those true strengths, and we use them to build on what you do well. And so we look, the starting point is like, where are you strongest in your life right now? What is it that you can achieve? What is it that you, if you look back on, you can find moments where, you know what, I am actually good at this, like I am capable, and we use them and we build on those. And, you know, it's not just a case of kind of like action lists, like, okay, how can I tidy my room? And then we put an action list together. Like, there's so much more to it than that. It's about exploring the emotions. So, you know, when you approach that task that you find difficult, or you approach that conversation that's hard, like, what are the emotions that are getting in your way at that moment in time? And that is what that is what really kind of allows you to stand out. So basically what we're doing, we're formulating an alternative to that negative self-talk. We're trying to search through and cut down all that negative bias, that negative self-talk, and we're finding all the positives that we can in your life, and we build from that point, and we are basically kind of looking to process an alternative to the negative self-talk, and we're pulling the focus away and we're moving towards the positive. Then we look at that new understanding, that new kind of version of yourself, and we anchor all of those newfound qualities and newfound strengths in that confidence and that ability to move forward and that ability to tell yourself, like, I am capable, I am whole, I am, you know, a capable, happy person. And as I said earlier, this phrase of like what we pay attention to grows. So let's flick the switch on that one and let's say, we've got stragglers coming in late here. And we say to ourselves, I am capable, and it grows. I am capable. I am confident, and it grows. Like, I'm a good person. I'm capable, I'm whole. And you know, the more these positive vibes are coming from your heart and from your mind, that grows within your mind. And that is the aim of the positive-based approach in coaching. I'm going to look at that strength-based approach in a couple of key areas, as I said earlier, a couple of topics that are quite prominent in ADHD, but actually that I find really interesting as well. So the first one I'm going to look at is situational variability. So think back to the thing about the reading where like the words jump around the page, but I find it impossible to put the book down. Like those two situations, like what is different from one to the other? Well, this answers that question. So Dr. Tom Brown is an ADHD expert in America, absolutely incredible specialist and has a huge amount of research and expertise. So he describes the ADHD brain as interest-driven and not importance-driven. Now, if we kind of look at that, that means that when interest is high, attention and focus are very high. And when interest is low, attention and interest are low. Attention and focus are low. And so we're not driven by, you have to pay that bill because it's important. We're driven by, we have to go and play that game because it's exciting, or we have to go and do this thing because it gives us that dopamine hit. It's the same brain, but chemically in those two different situations, high interest, low interest, the brain chemicals are literally operating completely differently. And you may have heard the word hyperfocus, less known term of hypofocus. So hyperfocus is that high interest, high attention, and hypofocus is that low interest, low attention. So hyper is those long periods of intense focus and almost like a flow state. You still have to be careful in these moments, although it's really positive and you can be incredibly productive. It can often lead to burnout. You know, you can forget to drink water, you can forget to eat, you can forget to take care of yourself, and you might go 8 hours and all of a sudden it's like, where did that time go? So you've got to be really careful and manage that. But if you can manage it well, it is such a massive, valuable asset for you to be able to learn. But it's all about getting that environment right for yourself. Now, when you look at hyper and hypofocus, this is it's really important to remember that it is about can't and not won't. It's like when you're in that hypofocus environment, that hypofocus situation, it's like there's a physical barrier between you and the activity, between you and the task. There's an emotional and a physical things like it's stopping you. And it's, you know, you would be told as a kid, why can't you just why won't you just tidy your room? Or why won't you just wash the pots? Or why won't you just stay tidy? Why won't you just look after this? And actually it's literally feels like a physical impossibility. And so you're not intentionally doing these things wrong. So this is where we kind of look at the strength-based approach. So how can we take advantage of this whole situation, right? So the first thing and most important for me personally is adapting the environment. Okay, so let's say, for example, you have to write a report for work, but to sit down at a desk for hours on end and type or write a report, it just feels like the most difficult thing for you and puts you heavily into that hypo-focus way. It feels impossible. But for me, I love walking. I love being outdoors. I like to speak so I can dictate. Okay, so yeah, let's get a speech to text tool on my phone. Let's get my shoes on. Let's walk down the river. and I'm going to dictate this whole report into my phone whilst I walk, whilst I walk down the river. And all of a sudden, I'm in this environment where my brain functions in that hyper focus mode and is in a really healthy, creative space. It's the same task, but different environment, and all of a sudden it feels completely different. One of the second things that is really useful, and it kind of links to that first there, is this thing called sparkleize. Like, it's a great little word. It's actually coined by Barbara Luther, who's one of the amazing kind of trainer coaches at ADCA. She's a fantastic coach. So, you re-sparkleize a task, like, you find it really difficult doing chores at home, or you find it difficult kind of doing certain tasks, then spice it up a bit, right? So add some music, add some kind of color and interest into it, add some challenge, some competition, maybe, if that's your thing. You're looking at ways of making that task more interesting so that your ADHD mind is more likely to get into that good habit of doing that activity. The final thing, and actually one of the most really interesting and peculiar solutions, is body doubling. And I don't know if you've heard of this before. It's basically a strategy where you have another person in the room whilst you're doing a task, and it could be they're physically in the room. They don't have to be involved. They literally could just be sat in the corner, or you could have someone virtually via phone or via laptop. And it's just having that person present in that space somehow that seems to just dampen that emotional barrier between you and the difficult thing that you're trying to approach. So those three really kind of key small changes, but make a huge impact in how that situational variability presents itself. So the second characteristic we're going to talk about is perfectionism. Again, this is a really interesting one. So perfectionism is often kind of seen as people exploring what others do and kind of analyzing the quality of their work. And that can be true, but predominantly it's about an internal conversation, I guess, an internal feeling. And perfectionism is kind of one of the most unwelcome and frequent characteristics with ADHD. And it kind of presents as this internal critical kind of self barrier. So there's this feeling that everything has to be perfect to begin, right? So in order to start this task, I need to be in exactly the right situation. I need to have exactly the right equipment, exactly the right information. Like, everything has to be perfect for me to begin. And so that if anything is slightly out of place, it creates this huge emotional barrier again. And it's this whole kind of all or nothing thinking, this kind of like black or white. It's like it's either perfect, it's either exactly how it should be, or it's a complete disaster, right? So it just that requirement, that expectation that you're putting on yourself is creating a huge barrier between beginning or even returning to a task. So it's often kind of really can be emotionally easier to, in the moment, to ignore the task, right? Rather than consider failure. And failure often is the kind of driver behind that feeling of perfectionism. Is like, why begin if I can't do it absolutely perfect? Why begin if I'm putting myself at risk of being criticized for my work? And so if we consider, again, the strength-based approach, it's really important before you begin a task to consider what is good enough. Like, what does finished look like? And rather than expecting 150%, like maybe 80% is good enough. Maybe 80% is enough, right? And also having phrases like done is better than perfect, or started is better than perfect in some cases, if you're finding it impossible to begin. What's really important as well is having that clear brief and clear outcome. So whether or not you're setting this task for yourself or someone's setting it for you, if you're at work, asking for that adjustment, that your manager or the person giving you that work gives you a really clear brief of what it is that they want you to go. Like, these are very clear outcomes, and this is how you need to achieve it. Having those things can really help get over that barrier of thinking that everything has to be perfect. And it just gives you that initial stepping stone to be able to get into the task. And you often find once you do begin and once you do start, which is better than perfect, a lot of those emotions will dissipate and a lot of those emotions will settle. Now, the final, and for me, the most powerful tool that anyone can use, and ADHD or not, it's such a fantastic tool, is the power of the pause. So you're in the situation, you're feeling kind of like stress around, like, I feel like I'm going to fail if I begin. I can't do this. I'm not capable. I'm just not good enough. It's like, okay, so the power of the pause, like, slow down, breathe, take a deep breath. Okay. Think about what's going on with your body. Like, is there some tension? Like, is your body telling you something? Is it tight here? Is it feeling strained? Like, what emotions am I actually feeling in this moment here? Like, is it that I am not capable, or is it that I've found this difficult before and not really been able to get past that barrier? Acknowledge your emotions, but then just let them kind of like drift away, right? And reflect on previous successes. So looking back to that positive-based approach, reflect on previous successes that can help you in the situation. It's like, okay, so where have I done this before where actually I did a really good job? You'll find that moment somewhere. And it doesn't have to be exactly the same. It could be something similar. It's kind of, and then reflect and use that in the current situation and use that to create that confidence to move forward. And as I say, once you take that first step, that is usually a huge reduction in that emotional feeling that you get with the difficulty. It's very much about high expectations, and usually very high expectations of yourself, and kind of just that whole fear of failure. So going back to that, what you pay attention to grows. Find those moments where you were successful and focus on them and allow them to grow within your space. So the last bit of information I'd like to share with you is around the gold standard of ADHD support. So speaking with a couple of colleagues last week in a kind of partnership group that we have, two other coaches, and we were talking about this gold standard of ADHD support. And actually, interestingly, I'm going to present you almost like the core layer of this, but there's so much more that goes around this as well. So education is so key, and you want to go out and you want to learn as much as you can about ADHD, whether it's for yourself or a partner or a friend or a colleague, and see what resonates with you or resonates with your relationship with that person. And be careful, because there's so much misinformation online. We're in an age where social media algorithms will give strength to controversy or contradiction, and those controversies and contradictions don't have to be true. So there's so much misinformation out there. So just be careful where you get your information, and look to find a reputable source for your education. And if you need to kind of confer between various sources. Medication is the second of the three core elements to the gold standard. I'm not a medical professional myself, but if you are interested in that, then you want to seek a specialist, a kind of clinical psychologist who specializes in ADHD. What I can say is CHAD, who are the children and adults with ADHD, they state that around about 80% of adults in ADHD medication trials experience kind of like moderate to large reduction in core symptoms. And so it can be very kind of successful with ADHD. The third core principle around this gold standard is coaching or CBT. From my perspective, I understand coaching, so I'll tell you a little bit about how that can help. So it's really about developing that self-awareness. It's, medication can improve your cognitive and emotional function. And then you're kind of left with, like, what do you do with this now newly found quiet in your mind and this newly found ability to focus? Like, where do you direct that attention? And it's kind of, with all this newfound knowledge and all this new headspace, coaching then provides you with that really kind of like safe and honest space for you to explore your own strengths and to find your own core strengths and values and beliefs, as we discussed earlier, and to use them to then develop and adapt your own mindset to find your own environment that allows you to thrive. And it's all about altering your own journey and finding, your own direction that is unique to you. And there's this kind of very common saying with ADHD. It's like, if you know one person with ADHD, you know one person with ADHD, because we're all beautifully unique. And it's just about finding that environment and that space and that setting that allows you to thrive and find that energy within yourself. So almost bang on time, as I say, roughly 35 minutes, nice ADHD friendly period of time. So I'm going to open up to questions, but as I said earlier, if you're not confident in speaking out loud, that's perfectly fine. Please drop me a question in the chat, or if you look at the bottom of the slide there, you'll see info@ADHD Remapped and it's .com. There's also a QR code on the screen there, which will take you to my Linktree. And there's a booking page on there where you can book in for a free 20-minute call just to chat about ADHD coaching, get some more information, provide one-on-one coaching, and also some group coaching settings as well. So it's just an opportunity to chat, see what you might gain from coaching, and see whether or not, my personality and your personality fit to create that environment for yourselves.